What?
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
I think we did.
Okay.
I think it, no. Yeah, I can do it.
You did in the other class, right? Oh, Tchias HaMeisim, I know you did.
Yeah.
You know what? One thing I know for sure I didn't do is the last one of the Beis Hamikdash. Let's start with that, and then we'll see on Friday. So in the booklet, let's go to the last, all the way at the end. There's a page that says 19 on it. We'll go there. 19. So let's turn the page. So we're going to talk about one of the things that are essential regarding the ties of Mashiach. It's part of our basic belief of what's going to happen, is that when Mashiach comes, we'll have the Beis Hamikdash once again. And this Beis Hamikdash, we refer to it as the third Beis Hamikdash, the third temple. So even though when the Jews were in the desert, they had a Mishkan, which is a sanctuary. And after they left the desert, when they went into Israel, they built another sanctuary. And it moved from one place to another. In fact, there was one place called Shiloh. Over there, they had a sanctuary that lasted for 358 years. And then they had another one, but it still wasn't Beis Hamikdash. Beis Hamikdash, which means the temple. Sometimes people will exchange the terms, but the Beis Hamikdash specifically means the one that Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, built, which was very different. It was a structure made of stone, and it was huge compared to the Mishkan, compared to the sanctuary that was in the desert. And it was physically more beautiful, and also spiritually, it was a very high level of divine presence that settled in this world when he built that temple. And that temple lasted for 410 years. Then it was destroyed by the Babylonians. There were 70 years of exile, and they built a second temple, and that lasted for 420 years. And that was destroyed by the Romans close to 2,000 years ago. And since then, we didn't have a temple. So one of the things about Mashiach that we learned about is, number one, we believe Mashiach is going to be a human being. Number two, he's going to lead the world to lead a decent life and serve Hashem. He will inspire all the Jewish people in the world and all the non-Jewish people in the world. So one of the things that are part of the basic belief is that when Mashiach comes, he will be rebuilding the temple. It will be built in the same place in Yerushalayim, and that's why we call it the third temple. It'll be the third one, starting from the one that King Solomon built. So in our prayers, when we ask for Mashiach, even though when you say the word Mashiach, you're already including everything, nevertheless, there's a need to specifically ask Hashem to rebuild the temple. So I just want to point out a few places. So the first, when you turn the page, these pages have numbers now. Page 1 is from the davening, from the Shemona Esrei, where amongst the prayers, which we say every day, and those who daven Shachris and Mincha and Meirah say this 3 times a day, is a special prayer for rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash. It says, Hashem, return in mercy to Jerusalem, your city. Dwell there as you have promised. Speedily establish the throne of David, your servant. Rebuild it soon nowadays. So rebuilding Yerushalayim, in essence, is referring to rebuilding the temple, the Beis Hamikdash, which was situated in Yerushalayim. At the end of the Shemona Esrei, again, at the end of the Shemona Esrei, which means we say this again 3 times a day, look at page 2, where it's underlined. We finished the Shemona Esrei with a similar prayer. May it be your will, Hashem our God, the God of our fathers, that the Beis Hamikdash be speedily rebuilt in our days, and grant us our portion in your Torah. So again, another prayer to build the Beis Hamikdash. When it comes to benching, the grace after meal, the blessing we make after eating, besides that fact that we're thanking Hashem for our food, we're also asking Hashem to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. So on page 3, you see in the bottom it says, Hashem have mercy upon Israel, your people, Yerushalayim, your city, Zion, the abode of your glory, which is the Beis Hamikdash, then the kingship of the house of King David, and so on. Look at the top words in the next page 4. Your King David, your anointed, and upon the great and holy house over which your name was proclaimed, which is the great and holy house, that's the Beis Hamikdash. And at the bottom, there's another, we conclude with a bracha again. Uvenei Yerushalayim, rebuild Jerusalem, the holy city, speedily in our days. So when it says rebuild the city, this is, we're all referring to the Beis Hamikdash Yerushalayim. So the next thing was at page 5. I want to go through a little bit from the text. The Rambam, Maimonides, what he writes about the Beis Hamikdash, what it's all about, where the sources and a few more details, which are all essential. It's a positive commandment. In other words, this is one of the 613 commandments. You're on page 5, you got it? Yeah. To construct a house for Hashem, prepared for sacrifices to be offered. We must celebrate there 3 times a year. As it says, you shall make me a sanctuary. So the mitzvah is to build it and to visit it 3 times a year. And when are those 3 times? By the festivals. Pesach, which is coming up. Moshiach comes now. We have a Beis Hamikdash. We all have a commandment to go visit the Beis Hamikdash on Pesach. And then to visit the Beis Hamikdash again on Shavuos. And then to visit a 3rd time on Sukkot. The sanctuary constructed by Moshe is already described in the Torah, which are the parshas we just finished learning and we're still learning. But it was only temporary. Like it says in Deuteronomy, at present you have not come into the resting place and the inheritance. In other words, the difference between the sanctuary that was in the desert, that was a temporary dwelling place for Hashem. It's like a person who's traveling and you have a tent. So you set up a tent. So Hashem's presence in this world was still traveling, so to speak. It wasn't a permanent dwelling place. So therefore, when the Jews were in the desert and they set up the tent, as you know, it was something which was movable and something which they reconstructed every time they moved to a new location. How many locations were all together? Anybody know? 42. They traveled to 42 different places, and there was a cloud that was guiding them. And when the cloud stopped, it meant this is a new spot to set up. And of course, only Hashem knows and understands what's about this spot that makes it. Obviously, it means every place in the world, every spot in the world has some sort of spiritual connection. And these were the spots that needed to have the Beis Hamikdash where Hashem would dwell. Some places, they stayed there for a few weeks. Some places, a few months. Some places for many years. And some places, they were only there for 1 day. They had to be in that spot and then move on to another spot. So that was in the desert. Let's keep going, the history. After the Jews entered the land of Israel, they erected the sanctuary in a place called Geulah. Again, it was still a temporary dwelling place. This was for 14 years. These were the 14 years that it took them to conquer the land and to divide the land to all the tribes. From there, they came to a place called Shiloh that I mentioned before. And that was a little bit different. They built a house of stone, but also had curtains. They spread the curtains of the sanctuary that they used in the desert. They used to cover this stone structure. It did not have a roof. This sanctuary stood for 369 years. Oh, I was almost accurate. When Eli died, Eli was the leader of Jewry at that time. He was the high priest. At the same time, the sanctuary was destroyed by a nation called Plishtim. Afterward, they came to a place called Nov, and they built a sanctuary. When Shmuel died, that was destroyed. Then they came to a place called Givon, and they built another sanctuary. And from Givon, they came to the eternal structure place in Yerushalayim, and that is, until there were 57 years. Once the temple was built in Jerusalem, it became forbidden to build a sanctuary for God or to offer sacrifices in any other place. In other words, this is Hashem's permanent dwelling place, so to speak. There is no sanctuary for all generations except in Jerusalem and on the mountain which is called Har Moriah. And David declared, meaning King David, this is the house of Hashem, and this is the altar for the burnt offering of Israel. This is my resting place forever. He's quoting Hashem, saying that Jerusalem is my resting place forever. That's the eternal place of Hashem. So in fact, you might remember when we were learning about Moshiach, one of the signs that he's the authentic person is if he succeeds in building the temple. But if you remember, we said there's one condition, more than one, but one condition was that he has to build it in the same place where it stood by the first temple and the second temple, which means if someone would come today and he has all the other, let's say, criteria, and he builds a beautiful Beis HaMikdash in Tel Aviv, it's not acceptable. It might be more beautiful than anything you can imagine. It's a good location, but that's not the location that Hashem chose, that this is his spot. In fact, if you remember, many months ago, we read in the Torah a parsha called Vayetze. Yaakov had a dream, and in the dream, he saw a ladder. Remember that story, of course? And in the ladder, he saw angels going up and down. What does it say about that ladder? This is the gateway to heaven. Where was the spot where he was sleeping? That was the spot, some English. In other words, that's the spot that's connected to heaven. We don't see any difference between one spot and another, but spiritually, this is through which Hashem connects to this physical world. I don't remember if I told you this once, but I remember I was once standing in 770 and I was talking to someone, and a young boy, 15-year-old, which is a student of the person I was talking to, said, could you lend me your iPhone for a few minutes? He gives him the iPhone. And then he goes over to a certain spot in 770. And we're watching him. He takes 5 steps to the right. Then he takes 5 steps back. Then he moves 5 steps forward, 4 steps, 3 steps, back and forth. It looks like he's doing a dance or something. Then finally he stops at a certain spot. So when he came back, he says to him, what in the world were you doing? Dancing here, there. So he said, oh, I'm talking to my mother who lives in, I think, Israel. And in the 770, they have 770 live. So you can see in 770, I guess they didn't have the ability to see with the phone. So he had to stand in a spot with a camera, she could see him and she can see his face. So first he stood there, then he stood there. So if you don't understand, you think he's doing some sort of a dance, that he's probably a little bit drunk. But if you know that there's other connections going on, you realize, no, that's the spot that you can see. The other spot, the camera won't pick it up. So there's spiritual, network going on, and there's a certain spot. That's where Hashem is found, and that's the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, I want to turn to page 8. See one more little piece. One of the main articles in the Beis HaMikdash was the Mizbeach. Mizbeach is the altar where they brought sacrifices. So look at chapter 2. He writes like this: the altar is to be placed in a very precise location, which means in the temple itself, it had to be put down in a very precise location, which may never be changed. As it says, this is a verse in the Torah, this is the altar for the burnt offering of Israel. This meaning this spot. What's so special about the spot? Isaac, which means Yitzhak, was prepared to be sacrificed on the temple's future site. Like Hashem told Abraham, go to the land of Moriah. And where was the spot where he was supposed to be brought as a sacrifice? That was that spot which we have today as the Mizbeach, the altar. When Shlomo Melech began to build a house in Yerushalayim, where Hashem appeared to David, his father, in the place that David had prepared, the threshing floor of Ornon from Hayavusi. In other words, this spot they had to buy from someone, it belonged to a person, and they said, this is the spot that Hashem wants it, and that's the spot where they built the Mizbeach. And it goes a little bit more into the history. It is universally accepted, which means this is something which is passed down, I guess, as the oral tradition of Torah, that the place on which David and Solomon built the altar, which is the threshing floor of this person called Ornan, is the same location where Abraham built the altar on which he prepared for Yitzchak. Noach also built an altar on that location when he left the ark. It says in the Torah, when he left the ark and back into the world, he brought sacrifices, thanksgiving to Hashem. It's also the altar on which Cain and Hevel brought their sacrifices. One of the first stories in the Torah, there were two brothers, and Cain brought a sacrifice and his brother brought a sacrifice, and his brother's sacrifice was accepted and his wasn't. He got angry, got jealous, and he killed him. So that spot was the same spot. Adam, the first man who offered a sacrifice, was also created at that very spot. In other words, not only he brought a sacrifice in that spot, his very creation, the sand and the earth that Hashem used to create the first human being, came from that spot. Now, sages say, man was created from the place where he would later find atonement. In other words, Hashem designated this spot, which is the spot where man was created from, that's the spot that you find atonement. The next page, page 10, is from the book called Yecheskel. Yecheskel was a Navi that lived in the times when the temple was destroyed. And he was one of the prophets that was exiled from Israel, from Yerushalayim, taken away to Babylon. And while he was in Babylon, he had this amazing prophetic vision. And there's a whole book called Yecheskel, and this is chapter 40. They underlined it just to see the general gist of it. It says like this, in the 25th year of our exile, which means they were already in exile 25 years, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th day of the month, which is basically Yom Kippur, in the 14th year after the city was conquered. On that very day, the hand of Hashem came upon me and brought me there. In a divine vision, he brought me to the land of Israel, set me down on a very high mountain. There was a structure there, like a city. He brought me there, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like of copper, with a linen cord and a measuring rod in his hand. He was standing by the gate, which was obviously an angel. The man said to me, Son of man, see with your eyes, hear with your ears, and set your heart to all that I'm going to show you now. For it was in order to show you that you have brought here, relate all that you see to the house of Israel. And then for the next 2-3 chapters, all the details of all the measurements of how the third temple will be built. This is a very famous prophecy. So even when they were in exile, after the destruction of the first temple, Hashem already gave him this prophetic vision, telling him what the future will be with the third temple. So now let's go over a few more details about the Beis Hamikdash. We know that it's part of the whole process. But one of the questions are when? When exactly will that take place? There's so many things that are going to happen. Where does it fit into the order of things? We're talking about the chronological order. So let's read. Which will come first? The ingatherings of the exile or the building of the Beis Hamikdash? So amongst the things that Moshiach is supposed to accomplish, one of them is to bring all the Jews from all over the world back to Israel. In fact, this week, what's the name of the parsha? Which means gathering. So 1992, one of the last talks that the Rebbe gave before the Rebbe had the stroke was this week in 1992. And the Rebbe said, we're already witnessing the beginning of this process of Jews from all over the world returning to Israel. In other words, we're seeing what's happening in general. Specifically, the Rebbe was referring to that here, Russia was a place where no one could get out for over 70 years. 70 years, it was called the Iron Curtain, because it was actually iron. No way that anyone can escape. And nevertheless, that curtain came down. Not only it came down, but the whole Russian regime, the communist regime, fell apart. It no longer existed. 1992, that's when it was in January. And from there, people not only were able to leave, but hundreds of thousands of people left Soviet Union, came to Israel, came to other countries too, but many hundreds of thousands came to Israel. So the Rebbe said that the Parsha is Vayakov, but also we should recognize and pay attention that we're already witnessing the beginning of this process. So here's the question, and we'll soon see how it fits into the question here. Which will come first? First, all the Jews will be gathered from all over the world, and they'll come to Yerushalayim, Israel, and then it will be the Mikdash, or the reverse. So based on the verse, there's a pasuk which says, Hashem builds Yerushalayim, He gathers the outcasts of Israel. This is a pasuk in Psalms, Tehillim, but actually we say this in davening every day. Where, I know the pages are not the same here, but as you see in Tehillim, it says, it's chapter 147. In davening, it's chapter which you say after Ashrei. And if you follow those words, it looks like that's the order. Hashem builds Yerushalayim, which means the temple, and then He gathers together all the people in Israel. The Zohar states, no, the other way around. First, the temple will be built, and then Hashem says, I will raise the Jewish people from the dust. And basically, in other words, He's basing it on another verse, where it seems to imply the opposite. No. The Zohar, by the way, is the same. I'm sorry. Yeah. The Zohar is the same. The next paragraph is different. According to Tanchuma is a medrash. Yerushalayim will not be rebuilt until all the exiles are ingathered. So the order, look at the order in the davening. First, we say, sound the great shofar for our freedom, and raise the banner to gather our exile. In other words, there's a part in the davening where we say, Hashem, sound the great shofar. That's based on a verse in the Torah where it says, it's in the books of the prophets, that Hashem will blow a big shofar, like a big, big trumpet, and then all the people will come, just like physically, when they wanted people to gather to the marketplace. There was a message. What do? They blew a trumpet, and everybody else, like today, you'll have an alarm, and everybody knows you have to come together to hear some sort of a message. Hashem will blow the shofar, and all the Jews will come gather together. And then the next blessing is rebuild Yerushalayim. So that seems to imply first the ingathering, and then the building of Beis Hamikdash. So what's new? There are two opinions. What else is new? Everything you do in Torah have two opinions. Next page, turn the page. What's the Rambam's opinion? Maimonides, who's a book of halacha, gives halacha ruling. What's his opinion? The top it should say 168. Rambam agrees with the Zohar. envisioning redemption as follows. First, Moshiach appears, returns the exiled Jews, people to Torah, brings them closer to Hashem. Then he rebuilds the Beis Hamikdash, and only then does he gather the exiles. And that's why the Rambam includes in gathering the exile amongst those acts which confirm that this person is really authentic Mashiach. However, even according to this opinion, if we merit supernatural redemption, it says that the redemption can take place two ways. One of the things we learned about in the beginning of the year was that the Gemara, the Talmud raises a question. In one place in the Torah, it says that Mashiach will come on a cloud from heaven, which means will come in some sort of supernatural way. There'll be a lot of drama. There's another place where it says he'll become riding on a donkey, like a poor person riding a donkey, which implies that he'll come in some sort of a regular way, a natural way. Which is the case? So the Gemara says it depends. Both are true. It depends on us. If we merit, then Mashiach will come inside of us with miracles in a supernatural way. If we don't merit, he'll come anyway, but he'll come in a much more natural way. What?
Why does it matter how we come?
It'll be more exciting.
Oh. One be faster than the other.
What?
One be faster than the other.
One is faster than the other also, yeah. Yeah.
Do you have, like, do you agree with Rambam that would be the order, or do you have a different interpretation of it?
So you'll see the next paragraph is a possible compromise where we sort of could reconcile both opinions together. We'll go into that in a moment. So in other words, if things happen in a very natural order, then this is the order, the way the Rambam puts it. If it'll be miracles and miracles, so then not necessarily will we follow in order, things will be out of order, but in a positive way. And it could be that we'll have everything happening at once, or one thing will come before the other in a different order. Now we know that just like between people, we always look forward to reconcile. People shouldn't have differences of opinion and be distant from each other, and you try to find a way to compromise. In Torah itself, whenever you see two opinions, if there's any possibility of understanding the subject in a way that both opinions hold, we make an effort to try to look for something. Maybe it's possible to see that both opinions are really true, and one complements the other in some way or another. So here, the Rebbe offers a way of compromising.
That's what Rebbe is saying?
Yeah, which means you can reconcile both opinions. Another possible reconciliation of the two opinions mentioned above, because both of these are the words of living Hashem. We know the Gemara says that when you find two opinions of Torah, even if the halacha is one way, not the other, but they're still both from Hashem and they're both truth and in a certain way, and therefore it's all part of Torah. This is the answer. We can say it as follows. The final all-inclusive ingathering of the exiles will follow and result from the building of the Beis Hamikdash. But some taste of our preparation for this event will take place beforehand, as we see today. Rebbe Shlita comments that if the ingathering of the exile precedes the building of the Beis Hamikdash, this sequence expresses the eminence and perfection of the temple, which means that the temple is so powerful and the holiness in the temple that it'll generate in the world will be so strong that will cause people to be attracted to, like a magnet. They'll want to come to Israel, they want to come to the Beis Hamikdash, and that'll bring people there. Conversely, if it is built prior to the gathering of the exiles, I said the opposite again, sorry. Someone put something in my water. it expresses the eminence of the perfection of the temple, which means that in order to have the temple, first you need all the Yidden there together, and then we can have the temple. If it is built prior to the gathering in exile, this reflects the eminence of the Jewish people. As it is written, it will come to pass on that day that a great shofar will be sounded, and those that are lost in the land of Assyria, and those that were led astray in the land of Egypt, meaning people who were dispersed and became distant from Yerushalayim, distant geographically speaking, and distant figuratively speaking, spiritually speaking. They will all return and come to worship Hashem, the holy mountain. The Jews will be gathered through the power of the Beis Hamikdash, which will already be built. So in other words, in a certain sense, what we're witnessing now is exactly this compromise that the Rebbe is talking about. We're already witnessing the beginning of the process of all the Jews being gathered together, and yet we don't have the Beis Hamikdash yet, but it's not, the process of all Jews coming to Israel is not complete, obviously. When the Beis Hamikdash will be built, then everyone will come. So in a way, the ingathering comes before the Beis Hamikdash, and it comes after. The beginning of the process is before, and the end of the process will be after the Beis Hamikdash will be built.
Why don't we make a greater effort and gather everybody for Israel?
Why don't we make a greater effort?
Yeah.
I guess because it's not just about the gathering. The main thing is to bring people closer to Hashem. That's where the effort is going to be. And the more people become closer to Hashem, then the more the spiritual process will take place. When we say people come to Israel, it's not a physical thing that they'll see, wow, we can make a lot of money here. It's a very peaceful place. At least certain places are peaceful. You know, it's wonderful. That's not what it's about. It's a spiritual draw. You know, when people go to Israel and they say, I love this place, I feel at home, there's something deeper than just something technical. Like it's a quiet little yishuv, it's a quiet little place, it's so nice, the air is great, and the sky is beautiful and blue. That's not what it's about. It's all about something spiritual. So I guess the more we generate spirituality in the world, the more people will become aware of the holiness of Eretz Yisrael, and they'll be drawn to it, and then everything else will happen.
Then you see so many people from Israel coming here to get closer to Israel. Like 7 million.
Yeah, people end up in the Far East, and that's where they come closer to Hashem. True. Okay, so that's discussing when it'll be built. Now we go to another question: who will build the Beis Hamikdash? Another discussion: who will be the one to build the Beis Hamikdash? What's the question? Page 169. The central phase of transition from Geulah to Geulah is the building of the third temple. In other words, we see a lot of things happening now. We went through this in class. That are things that are unprecedented, and they're definitely part of the process of redemption. But the key thing that's going to happen, that's going to indicate we've now crossed the line, we've crossed the bridge into the era of redemption in fully, that's once we have the Beis Hamikdash standing. And the reason for that is because the Beis Hamikdash, that's the sign that Hashem returned his presence to the Jewish people. And the Beis Hamikdash is the home where Hashem will return. So this will confirm that the presumed Mashiach is indeed Mashiach, like the Rambam writes, because once the Beis Hamikdash is built, if he succeeds, that's a sign that Hashem really appointed this person to be Mashiach. But how will it be built? Again, there are two opinions. According to the Zohar, it says Hashem himself will build the Beis Hamikdash, rendering it eternal. In other words, the previous temples were built by man. Man is limited, and therefore whatever men built, whether it was Shlomo Melech, King David, or Ezra, all the prophets, whoever built it, because they were humans and humans are limited, So their products are also limited. The third Beis Hamikdash will built by Hashem himself. Hashem is eternal. So the Beis Hamikdash will also be eternal. That's going to be the difference. One of the differences between us going out of exile now and all the other times that we had redemption was those redemptions were temporary. And this one is eternal. This will be forever. And the third Beis Hamikdash will be forever. So this will be built by Hashem himself. Similarly, we find this is the opinion of Rashi. Yeah.
Isn't that Beis Hamikdash like being built now?
Yeah, he's going to get to that. You mean the one in heaven? So this is Rashi. Rashi writes that the third temple will come straight from heaven. And Rashi also bases it on a verse. It says, your hands have established a sanctuary of Hashem. And it's referring to the future Beis Hamikdash. But there's another source, which is Medrash, by Yikra Rabbah. It says, man will build the final Beis Hamikdash. What is the Rambam? Again, why we usually look to the Rambam, because he gives halachic rulings on the subject. He rules that Moshiach will build it, for it is a commandment incumbent upon the Jewish people. So he says it will be built by humans. It will be built by humans, and Moshiach will be leading the process of construction. In fact, according to what Rashi says, according to what the Zohar says, the Beis Hamikdash is already built. The temple is sort of built in heaven and just waiting for the right moment. And when the right time comes, that temple will come down, and that'll be the temple in Yerushalayim. But again, we look to reconcile both opinions. Here too, we can also reconcile both opinions. It is explained in the, yes?
Who said that the Hamikdash will be built by man?
Rambam. So it's explained in the Kutis Sichos that there's no contradiction here. Rather, the Jewish people will be building part of the Beis Hamikdash because it's a commandment. And then there's another part to it, which is more lofty, more spiritual, and that will ensure its eternity. That comes from Hashem himself. In other words, one way of looking at it is like the soul and the body. The body is physical, but the body contains in it a soul, the neshama. And the neshama is what enables us to do all the things that we do. All our faculties, all this is because of the neshama, the life force that we have in us. So what he's saying is, in a sense, the Beis Hamikdash will also have a neshama, will have a soul. The soul will be Hashem's presence that will descend and be embodied in the Beis Hamikdash. So both things are true. There'll be a physical structure, and that we will build. And that's the part that's a commandment. You have to build a physical structure, meaning physical, with stone and workers doing work, just like the other Beis Hamikdash. Hashem from heaven, when we say he'll bring down the Beis Hamikdash, meaning the spiritual component to the Beis Hamikdash, a much higher, deeper, loftier aspect, which will be inside the Beis Hamikdash, and that'll make the Beis Hamikdash eternal, and all the other spiritual features that it'll have will come from above. And this explains why the Rambam doesn't mention this, because the Rambam is halacha. The Zohar is a book which talks about all sorts of spiritual things, so he explains this. But the Rambam talks about halacha, practical halacha. Practical halacha, he deals with practically what we need to do. We need to build. The fact that there's another feature here, which is a spiritual dimension to the temple, and that'll come from heaven, from Hashem, that's not in the Rambam, that's found in these other sources. There's other ways of explaining it, and we'll do that on Friday, Mitzvah Hashem. That's number page 13, to be continued. So hopefully we'll leave the books here, and they'll be here by Friday still. Okay.
Thank you.
Shira, your Shira? Shira Gadol was here? No. Shira? Somebody know? No, okay.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
Oh, right. What? Yeah. Yes, yeah.